Hi, everyone. This is your host, Susan Rosen. And my guest today is Nina Lockwood. Nina is a transformative coach, author, speaker, and artist who shares the joy of creativity, inner freedom, and genuine aliveness. And Nina has over 30 years of expertise in psychology and personal development, and over 20 years in the field of energy medicine. Nina works with both individuals and organizations by pointing them to their innate, unlimited ability to access wisdom, creativity, so they can live a wonderful life. And Nina's website is ninalockwood.com, and I will post that in the show notes for all of you who would like to go and visit her website and see all the different things that she offers and that she is involved with. So welcome, Nina, and I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So we were chatting a little bit before, and what I think we were talking about, and what I really would like to talk about today is the broader definition of health and wellness, and how that is so important these days, especially with all the things that are going on, for people to understand how health and wellness is not just whether you're eating organic or not. Health and wellness has to do with all aspects of your life, and whether it's your money or your career or your family, and of course your actual physical health. But they're all tied up together, and I think people are becoming more and more aware of just how tied up a lot of these things are. And so I would really like to get your view of that, and particularly having to do with this time period around COVID. But as I think that's just has made it more of an extreme to something that's actually normal. I don't know if that makes sense. But maybe if you can talk a little bit about that, and then we can just see where the conversation goes.
Sure. Well, it is a crazy time. There's no doubt about that. And it's something that has disrupted everyone's life. And if you just take a look at us as human beings, you can't really separate our health from our mental well-being, our emotional well-being, even the spiritual component, in addition to the physical component. We're all one component that has many little bits to it, and that you can't really separate one from the other. So it's important when you're, for example, if you're feeling stressed out or worried about the future with the way things are now and the threat of things possibly getting worse, is to realize, at least for me, it seems really important to realize how much what we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves, affect our health, our ability to think clearly, our ability to have some sense of equanimity or hope in when we look at a world that looks very dark and could get darker.
I would agree. I would agree. And so what are some practices, maybe is a good word to start with, that people can think about and perhaps implement into their own lives to help them to deal with some of these issues, and might be a good place kind of to start?
Yeah. I think instead of talking about specific techniques or practices, I'd love to play around with what's going on behind the curtain of our behaviors.
No, that's good. That sounds like a good idea.
I think when you do that, at least what I've seen helpful about that is that when we understand how our minds work and how that triggers so many other things, it causes a cascade of effects in our physical body and the rest of us, we can begin to make some changes. Whereas if we aren't aware of them, it kind of just goes downhill.
Yeah.
One of the explanations that I heard from Joe Dispenza, who is, you probably know who he is. He's pretty well known in the meditation world, and he's done a lot of work with the Heart Math Institute and understanding the nature of the mind, is that when we have, he explained it in a diagram. He said, when we have a thought, the thought triggers a feeling. The feeling triggers a biochemical reaction in the body, and that consequently triggers a physical reaction or an action that you would take, a biological reaction or something that you would actually do in response to it. And because we as humans have a tendency to overthink, especially potentially negative consequences, we go back up to that same thought again, triggers the same feeling, the same emotions, the same behaviors, and we wonder why nothing is different.
Yeah.
It's a little crazy, but I think because we're worried about the consequences if we don't pay attention to those troubling thoughts, that we have to obsess about them to figure out what the answer is. So we get into a rut where nothing new, we can't hear anything new, we can't do anything new. And the place that he suggests is the point of change is to stop at the point of, and notice at the point of our thinking, that our thinking is what's triggering the biochemical responses, whether it's adrenaline or cortisol or something that we're producing in response to believing that we're stressed or that the object out there is causing us difficulty. But the truth of it is, which is a little harder to see, but it makes sense, is that it's not the event, it's how we're thinking about the event that's actually causing a problem, causing these biochemical responses, causing more worry, more stress, upset stomach, anxiety. All of those things can be traced back to how our mind is, all the opinions that we're having about the thoughts that we're even having to begin with. So it's all tied in.
Do you think that there's a kind of addiction almost to certain thoughts? It's like we think them so often and we say to ourselves, oh no, that's not good. I don't need to think about that. Da, 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 da. But then, half an hour later, you're thinking the same thoughts again.
Well, I think there is some kind of momentum to our thinking. If we have been entertaining them for years and years and years, then it's likely that they'll show up again unless we don't let them in. One of my favorite quotes is from a Zen master who said something to the effect of, open your front door and your back door, let your thoughts come and go, but don't invite them to tea.
Interesting. I wonder who that was. Okay, but whatever. Sorry.
One of those
Zen masters. I've spent a lot of years in the Zendo, so that's why I'm like, wonder who that was. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's
so I think, when I spend a lot of time in the world of energy medicine, I saw that what happened frequently, and there are a lot of modalities out there these days, not just one or two, there's hundreds of them, that there was a lot of chasing symptoms.
Yeah.
And if I just follow this symptom back to the cause, but you could spend your whole life going, well, what's before that? What's before that? And that without an understanding of how our minds work and how our minds affect our physical body and how the narratives that we tell ourselves either keeps us on the surface of life and reacting as a victim to what happens to us, to our circumstances, or whether we get more, I don't know if I want to use the word empowered, but we become more aware that we have a choice in how we respond to what's going on around us.
Yeah. Yes, I would totally agree. And I think awareness is the big key.
Yeah.
To so
and that
much.
happens, I think, when you start to feel like something's just not right here.
Yeah.
You know, that sense of this just doesn't feel like it's the whole story. That discontent, I think that's what gives us a sense of willingness to explore what else might be going on that we're not necessarily aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well that you can have the awareness, but then the other level, I guess, of it is to say, okay, I don't need that anymore. You know, to somehow be able to say, okay, thank you for sharing. And
Step to the side.
Exactly. And you know, I've learned the lesson, and okay, I can move on. And it's I know, just in my own personal experience of having gone through that, and letting go of some huge things in my life. And it's just like you feel like you've, shed 50 pounds. I mean, it's amazing how much it can weigh you down and you don't even realize it.
Yes. I think until you're willing to ask why or what else is possible, then we're still stuck in that continuous loop of reacting to our circumstances as if we are victims to them. And I think knowing that we do have options is really important for our well-being, because most of us think, well, because I thought that thought, it must be true.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so much of what we think, or that we see and we think we saw, is not true.
Yeah.
It's our own version.
It's our own projection so much of the time, for instance, even with the pandemic that's going on. Yes, there are safety measures you can take. And then beyond that, how much time do you need to spend on it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You just do it.
And then there's the rest of your life. There's this present moment. There's so many other things here besides the threat of that virus. And if all I'm going to do is worry about that, then I'm not going to sleep well at night.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yes. At the same time, you don't want to be one of those people that says, oh, this is doesn't mean anything, and it's all a hoax, and and all this kind of stuff. It's just a matter of being aware, again, doing what you need to do, and getting on with your life.
Yeah. It's not so different, I don't think, I'm going to try an analogy here, of climbing a mountain. You need to have the right equipment. You need to dress for it. You need to have the right food for it. You need to know what to expect. And then you're on the journey. You put one foot in front of the other, but you're not always saying, oh, did I pack this? Or did I remember that? Or you're there and you experience what's present in the moment.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Exactly. And, and it's interesting, because you were talking about, when you were just saying that, I was thinking the same thing, like being out here in California, it's earthquakes, right? You just get all the stuff ready, and then you go on with your life, because you don't know when it's going to happen. You just want to be prepared. That's all.
Well, it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because wanting to be prepared and wanting to control tends to we tend to go overboard on it when there's a scary situation. That, well, it's not enough just to pack the bag. It's not enough just to have the disinfectant or the masks.
Right.
It's not enough. It's not enough. And that we forget that we have an innate intelligence that will guide us in the moment. What do I need to do here? So that we're not immune, but we're taken care of.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yes. No, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense, because there's only so much you can do. Right.
Yeah.
And then you have to kind of give it over to the universe in a way, to you, which is your own innate wisdom.
Yeah. I think one of the things that was I was going to say disillusionment, but it just was a realization about a lot of the energy medicine programs out there are based on a fundamental premise that we're broken. Our chakras are closed, our energy field is constricted, our meridians are blocked. Again, that's on the surface level. And 99 times out of 100, that energy anatomy is affected by how I'm thinking about the world around me. Is it a safe place? Is it a dangerous place? Do I need to defend myself? What do I need to do? Is it hostile? Is it friendly? And that can really put a wrench in the works, rather than having a perspective that we actually have much more going for us than we normally think. And to me, having that understanding that our minds can really make a huge difference in our well-being, in our emotional well-being, in our ability to function in the world, in our ability to manage stress. And the more we realize that we actually have some choice, that we don't have to believe everything we think, we can keep the stress levels lower, and we can think more clearly so that we know how to take care of ourselves physically and otherwise. Turn off the news, go out for a walk. There are so many things we can do on a simple level that can have profound effects for us.
Absolutely. I totally agree, for sure. Yeah, it's and I think a lot of that, as you and I were talking about earlier before we got on the podcast, that so much of our mindset and our thinking just, it impacts what we do in our lives, and how things turn out, and how we feel, and how we react. And it's so important, again, getting back to awareness, it's so important to watch and see what we're doing, and seeing how we see other things in our lives, how we see, the world kind of seeing us, if you want to put it that way. There's someone who I listened to, God, for years now, but and she always says, there's the three things. There's how you see yourself, how the world sees you, and how you see the world. And it's kind of all those, you put all three of those kind of together, and then you can kind of synchronize and just live from that place.
Of course, the tricky thing there is that all of those are a moving target. How I see myself, I'm in a good mood, I'm great. If I'm in a low mood, well, I have this problem and that weakness, and be careful about that. I have no control over how the world sees me. That's just a given. I have no idea, because everybody lives in their own separate realities. So what I might think looks and sounds
Yeah.
pretty good, somebody else couldn't care less about.
Uh-huh.
So it's an interesting game to play,
Yeah.
juggling perceptions.
Uh-huh. Exactly. Exactly. Stephen. And to me, it kind of brings out the whole thing of well, in the short run and the long run, it's all really kind of under my control. It all kind of comes down to, how do I see myself? Because if I see
Can you say
myself in a
more about
certain
that?
way, well, I think that how I see myself is partly how I then project myself out into the world, which then becomes how the world sees me. And I think all of it, I think that what it is that all of it really starts with us. And to me, it just brings a knowledge that it's all coming from me. And it just kind of brings it back. It brings it, at least for me, it brings it back to me and myself.
Yeah. I think that that's a really good point, because sometimes we talk about living life from the inside out, which, in my understanding, is a reference to the fact that, well, the way I've heard it described is the mind is not a camera, it's a projector. So, and this is an interesting connection to what Bruce Lipton, who wrote The Biology of Belief, and is
I love Bruce Lipton, yeah.
what he talks about in The Biology of Belief. If we see the world as a hostile place, then our body is going to respond appropriately.
Yeah. Yes.
And most of us think the world is a scary, hostile place, and that we need to protect ourselves from it. But what if we've exaggerated that to the point where we've really lost our sense of what we already have going for us? Because if I feel helpless, then that's going to send a whole lot of biochemicals through my body that I am not going to enjoy having. So there are ways to discern what's dangerous and what we're taking to an extreme, I think. Because
Yes.
you can give yourself an anxiety attack by, is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? Well, what if he gets sick, or what if she gets sick, or what if I get sick, or what about my job, or bankruptcy, or we can add such elaborate stories to what's actually going on that our bodies are sensitive to what we're thinking, so they respond in kind. Oh, you're telling me to be afraid? All right, well, let's jack up the adrenaline and get moving, do something.
Yeah.
Rather than going inside and finding a way to find a place that has more equanimity in it, and is a little bit more, can see things more clearly.
Yes, I would totally agree. I would totally agree. And if we see, if we think that the world is attacking us, then we react certain ways, which then the people the world and the people we're interacting with then think that we're attacking them because we're defending ourselves. And I mean, it starts a whole thing, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. And so much of that is projection. They are going to think this, I think that. And
That's right.
I think one of the most valuable things that I've learned is that everybody has their own separate reality. And there's no
Yes.
way that that's not possible, because I've grown up with my own conditioning and my own personal
Uh-huh.
history. Yours is different. Everybody's
Uh-huh.
is different. So I could say the
Yes.
word light, and you could think I'm referring to weight.
Right.
I could be referring to sunlight. I could be,
Uh-huh.
there's so many
Yeah.
so many meanings to words,
Mm-hmm.
which makes one level of confusion. But when we realize that we don't see the world, even though we agree on language,
Mm-hmm.
and yes, there's the sun, or yes, there's whatever it is in front of us, we still have a separate interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
That means X, and your interpretation is different.
Mm-hmm.
And to realize that when people respond, it's not personal to us. It's in response to their own
Right.
projection, their own lenses that they're looking through.
Uh-huh.
And I know for myself, when I used to take things personally, I would get sick. I'd get migraines, and I'd be worried, and my stomach would be upset, and I didn't sleep well. And it took me a long time to put two and two together on that I was really making up a scenario in my head and then living from that and making myself sick as a result.
Which is, I think, where the whole thing of creating your own reality comes from.
Yeah. Yes.
And so many people are like, oh, how can I create that when so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that? And it's like, well, we can talk about it if you're open to it, but if you're not, it's not worth it. But
I think a lot of this has to do with to what degree we live on the surface of our lives, and whether we're interested in going a little bit deeper.
Agreed. Yes.
There are lots of people who have no clue that eating junk food is bad for them. It's a decision that they make because they're used to it. They have a limited budget. That's what they've always done.
That's how they were raised.
Yeah. So doesn't it depend on what a person is actually starting to look at?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I guess where I was kind of coming from was that there's a lot of people who even if they realize there's an issue with it, get so defensive that sometimes it takes a while for them to let go of that defensiveness, to see that, oh, well, maybe they could change this over here or that over there and start the process.
That speaks to me, that speaks to an element that I think we could all do better with having more of, which is realizing what we already have going for us. I think that there are many people who realize that they overthink, or they exaggerate, or they're a worrier, or whatever label it is that's not so productive. And yet what we have, and some of that, you could say is related to human beings and looking for danger and trying to prevent it from happening. But one of the things I think that we don't spend more time doing is recognizing what we already have going for us. For instance, if we have super busy minds and it's not serving us, is that many of us don't realize there's a deeper level within us, which is why there's more of an interest now in meditation and relaxation exercises. We have the way I think that human beings are constructed, the way we experience life on the planet. There is so much that we have at our fingertips, but it's as though nobody ever told us that things aren't personal, that there are so many things we can do to take care of ourselves on a holistic level, mind, body, physical, spiritual. They're all part of the same package that we're living with.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the other thing, just to continue on that, is that once you do start changing some of those things, you end up finding that it impacts and in a positive way all the other parts of your life.
Yeah.
You know, your dealings with your parents, your dealings with your kids, your dealings with people at work. You know, there's all these different levels besides just feeling better yourself,
Yeah.
and your health. And I think that's one of those things that I think people get so surprised at. Right? It's kind
Yeah.
of like, gee, you know, how come I'm not arguing with my husband as much? Things like that, right?
Yeah.
Or somebody says something to you, gee, you seem like you're feeling better. Or, gee, you seem like you're getting along with people better, or whatever. And you don't really, we sometimes can feel it in ourselves, but we don't notice it until people start telling us in the outside world.
Yeah, that something shifted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you were, when we were talking earlier, you were interested in expanding the definition of health to include all facets of our being.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you see it?
Well, first off, I think I see it as, I see us as one, I don't know, being is what comes to mind, but I want to say that in a different context than just like human being kind of thing. But for all parts of us, that how we interact with people, how we think of ourselves, and what our values are in our lives. And that, to me, it seems that the more I have become aware of myself, my own thoughts, my own feeling of, and knowing that I'm okay, you know, in my inner wisdom. And I will say that even to a certain degree, a little of that started decades and decades ago, when I did spend a lot of time in the Zendo, and I spent a lot of time in meditation. And I can still kind of drop down into that place. It's kind of in me. This is kind of where I feel it, but everybody's got their own little place. But that, and that's kind of what I call my inner wisdom as well. It's because it's really the same feeling. And I know that as long as I can come back to that, as long as I can kind of center myself on that and give myself the opportunity and the can't think what the right word is, but that it's okay to do that. And if I can come from there, give myself the space to be able to come from there, that I'll be okay in whatever I'm doing, and whatever I want, and whatever I'm dealing with will come out okay. And so that's the kind of feeling thought, you want to call it, back to the whole inside out, that I'm infusing more and more into my life and trying to share with people as well. And so that's how I see this health and wellness being a much bigger, more inclusive, theory isn't the right word, but of how to live, and where to come from. And I have found that the more I do that, the less reactive I am to things.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Because I used to be very reactive, and I used to hold on to stuff. And I'm not talking about for an hour. I mean, I'm talking about for years. I would keep playing things over and over and over in my brain.
Yeah.
And I don't do that anymore.
Do you think that's contributed to your being healthier than you may have been in the past?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yes. Yeah, I've just been a lot more open to things and to people. And it's, there was a tightness in my body and in my brain and my emotional core that that it's like it just kind of opened up.
Yeah. I've been having a few discussions lately with people about happiness and feeling alive, and how many people either feel deadened by their reaction to what's going on in the world, that they just can't take it in anymore, and they're like turtles, they've gone into their shell, or they're reactive in a way that they know isn't healthy for them, but they kind of can't help it because the way they see the world is as a dangerous place. And yes, of course, some parts of the world are dangerous and some aspects are. Clearly, we're living in that time right now. And yet, if we knew how much more we were adding insult to injury by doing that, we probably wouldn't do it as much. That we knew that, part of what I was saying earlier about knowing what we have going for us. We have this, from this particular understanding, we have this always have an inner resource, always have an inner wisdom that is our guidance system, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
And that we rely less on that because our world, the Western world, relies on intellect and analysis. And yet there's something instinctive, intuitive, that gut feeling that leads us, go here, go there, do this, do that, yes, no, that we pay less attention to, but has a huge impact on our well-being.
Absolutely. And I think,
you just think of how people, when they're really stressed out and trying to figure something out, their brow gets all furrowed and they're frowning, and their hands tighten up and in fists, as opposed to just allowing yourself to wait for the answer to occur to you, because an idea always happens. You can't stop them.
Yeah. And if you're open, if you're more open and relaxed, those ideas usually are much better.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because, you think about it and you think, okay, how many times have you you've got some issue that you're trying to deal with and you just can't come up with what you think is going to work. And then you go off and you do something else. And then all of a sudden it'll occur to you.
Yeah.
Because
They
you're
have
open
research.
to it.
They
Yeah.
have some research on how people get their ideas in the shower.
Yeah.
So then the next question is, well, how many showers should I take in a day?
Well, if you have a dog, go take the dog out for a walk. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do that are. I find it's
Yeah.
always someplace where I don't have any way to write it down.
Uh-huh.
It's like, oh hell, what was that great thought that I had, that idea?
Right. Right. Always have to have some kind of a phone or recorder or something on you,
Yes.
so when your ideas come, you can catch them.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It is funny that way. But it's yeah. And I think the other thing is that people, and I'm not going to say it's more so now, because I think through all of history it's always kind of been this way, and it ebbs and flows, which is that there's always this whole thing about, it's the guy next door or those other people over there or whatever have more than I have. They're getting some of my stuff that I should be getting. And I've never really quite understood, where that comes from, but it's obviously something that's somehow either ingrained in human society, or just physiologically, to make sure that you get your family fed or something. I don't know what it is, but I think it's become even more of an issue.
Well, certainly there's a polarization right now into who the haves and the have-nots.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think that goes back, I can even see examples of it in my own life, where if I'm comparing myself, they have something that I don't. Where's mine?
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with what I'm capable of creating or producing. It takes all of the emphasis off of what's possible for me and puts it on, why don't I have what they have?
Yeah.
I should have that. But how could you? We live totally different lives. It doesn't make sense to compare apples and oranges.
Yeah. Well, and how many times have we gotten what we think somebody else has and then not been happy with it?
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
that's an excellent point. That's actually a really interesting point, because that has an effect on our health and well-being too.
Yes, absolutely.
To think that we're going to be fulfilled by something in the world of form.
Yes.
It doesn't last.
Mm-mm.
You get excited about your Christmas presents, and by 2:00, it's over. You're looking for something else.
Well, that's
So that
like little kids, right? I mean, they end up playing with the boxes and the paper.
Right. Right. And then even that too, after a while.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We're funny. We've
We
got some
are.
funny conditioning.
Yes. Well, I think human beings just overall are kind of strange sometimes.
Well, we have developed some peculiar habits, that's for sure. Do you think that there is a general receptiveness or increasing receptiveness to taking care of yourself in more than just wearing a raincoat in the rain, or taking care of your physical body? How do you see it?
I think there is. I definitely think there is. I think, I don't know, I think in a lot of ways in the US, or should I say in the Western culture, I think we still have a lot more emphasis on things and not as much on self as some of the Eastern cultures, who are based more in some of the more contemplative types of philosophies. Not that the East or Asia or whatever hasn't gotten very consumer oriented, just like the West, but somehow I think it's just built on a different core. And I think that the people in the West, I think, especially, I think COVID kind of really has made people, well, number one, has made people stop because they didn't have a choice. They've started to realize, I think, how important it is to connect with people.
Which is another really important element in well-being and health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact,
so many studies.
Yes. Well, that's what I was saying. I just recorded my podcast that went up on Monday that had to do with a study, excuse me, that they did back in June or July. I can't remember. And they talked to a lot of people, found out whether they were lonelier than they were before all of this hit. And what they actually found was that the majority of people were not lonelier. The loneliness had not gone up because there were so many people reaching out to find out how they were doing. And they were reaching out to other people to find out how they were doing, checking in on people. And the way that the study researchers described it was that they felt that it actually was an increase in resilience because people felt more of that connection. Now, for the younger generation, the youngest generation, I'm not talking about the little kids, but their 20s or something, some of them had a little bit of feeling more social isolation, but it wasn't necessarily loneliness that they were feeling. And I think a lot of that, to way I interpreted it, was because they're online and all of that, and a lot more than those of us that are older. And so they don't necessarily pick up a phone and talk to people. They'll do Instagram, they'll do text, they'll do all these other things. And even though you can record voice messages and things like that, I'm not sure how many people actually do that. Same thing with lives, Facebook lives or something like that. And to me, it's not exactly the same as give and take. And so I think everyone else it's been more real contact, and not just, see so-and-so put this picture up or something. It's kind of the way I interpreted it, but I may be wrong, but that was my thought around it. But I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah. So having a connection or feeling a sense of being connected to other people is a really important component of well-being. And so is what I don't really like the way this is put, but so is having a sense of purpose or meaning.
Yes.
Is really important for our own mental well-being. Because if we feel there's nothing to live for, then all bets are off. Why bother doing anything?
I agree.
It's a very, very dispirited way of living in the world.
And it can also create a lot of issues. I know I had with my mother. She got to the point where not that she had a big group of friends, but just about everybody was gone. She was in her 90s. She started hearing things, other people that she thought were out to get her. We took her to get checked, and the doctor said, no, it's loneliness. He said she's not interacting with enough people. And she was on the computer. She was on all these kinds of things, but part of that was her personality as well. She just wasn't interested in going out with all those old people. So, but that being said, I mean, it was just very interesting to see how that played out, because we kept thinking, well, is it Alzheimer's? Is it dementia? Is it, what is it? And the psychiatrist said, no, it's none of those things. She's just not interacting with people.
And there's positive interaction and there's negative interaction.
Yeah.
Both of those can affect us very deeply.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
I've often wondered about how such an emphasis is placed on diet. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that at all, because I've read some of the research and I know how it feels to eat junk food versus eating something that has some substance to it. But people have done studies where gratitude, being grateful for the food that you have, is more important than the quality of the food.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting thing, that we can have a different relationship to, again, in our mind, what's our relationship to food? What's our relationship to one another? What's my attitude towards my own body?
I was just going to say towards ourselves, just towards ourselves, period.
Yeah. Because if I'm filled with self-loathing or self-recrimination or self-doubt, or where I'm questioning and saying, this isn't right, you didn't get this right, you screwed that up, that is also going to release a chain of biochemicals in the body. Not going to like that one. And when we realize that we have a choice, that we don't have to believe everything that our thoughts are telling us, because they're just coming and going in our head. It's only our conditioning that gets us to pick up the one that's troublesome and hold on to it.
I was going to say, I was thinking that, like dear for dear life.
This one out.
Yeah.
Right. But that we don't have to. One of the things that I found a really important concept in energy medicine is the idea of flow, that well-being is based on a flow of energy moving through not only the body, but all the systems within our body. So wherever there is a blockage, if you will, there is something resisting the flow of life.
Okay.
Many times it's from our thinking. I don't want this to happen, or I'm afraid of that, or that better not happen, to all sorts of preconditions that I put on things. That affects the body. So many things that we don't think are that important, but they are.
Yeah.
We're complicated beings. We have this body that needs to be fed and dressed and kept warm, and we need to use it to make money so we can eat and have a roof over our heads. And yet the amount of time we spend judging it and seeing it as inadequate, or too old, or too young, or too this or too that.
Yes.
Knowing that every time we do that, our body is sensitive to it. And it's affected by that, our own self-talk.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's even worse than if anybody else is criticizing us. We can be much harder on ourselves than anyone else is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what we may not believe when somebody else says it, it's always accurate when we say it, right?
I think one of the keys is that if we realize that, going back to that diagram that I was mentioning by Joe Dispenza, if we realize that our thinking is triggering our feelings, and our feelings are triggering the chemicals in our body, if we know that, it's possible. We don't have to be chanting mantras or repeating positive affirmations over and over again,
Mm-mm.
but to know that we have underneath all of that, on a deeper, more fundamental level, all is well.
Yes.
And this is just surface noise that's happening, that we can dive beneath that
Yes.
and find a level of peace, which without that, it's pretty hard to be totally healthy.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I would totally agree. So maybe that's a good place for us to wrap up, since we've kind of come full circle.
Full circle. Yeah.
Yes. So first, let me thank you for
You're
being on
welcome.
the show.
My pleasure.
It's been really enjoyable talking. And let me do my usual of I am not a doctor, and this is not to be construed as medical advice. If you have a medical problem, please go see your own doctor. If you have an emergency, please go to the emergency room. And so I will put Nina's information into the show notes for anyone who's interested. And I will talk to all of you again next week.